Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Bobby, fresh in from Bulgaria. I arrived last night. And as you can see, I'm here with MentorMate at Tieto company. And we hear about AI in basically every talk here today. And it's been making the headlines when it comes to innovation in the past few years, with all of its pitfalls and opportunities. So I'm here today to share a few AI perspectives and processes that may help you when you embark on your next AI innovation project. More specifically, how do we do responsible AI? How do we adopt and build AI processes in the right way? A bit about myself. I've been working as an AI product manager and consultant since 2018. I've helped companies, private companies, a few governmental institutions, and a few of the biggest NGOs out there with their AI strategy. Nowadays, I'm an AI capability lead at the Bulgarian Delivery Center of MentorMate. And I'm also, in parallel to my work, I'm doing a PhD specifically researching synthetic data and digital twins. Also, since recently, I'm a working group member of the EU AI Office, where we work on the Code of Practice of General Purpose for AI Models, part of the EU AI Act. So today I'm going to tell you about why why responsible AI is important, why exactly now, and I'm going to share with you our own approach of doing that. A disclaimer here. What I'm going to share with you is a few frameworks that we have built internally and we are using in all of our AI projects. And we are currently in the process of putting them open source on the market so everyone can use them. And at the end, we'll have a bit of a discussion. Very briefly about MentorMate. We are part of Tieto Create. We span the globe with offices in 4 different continents. We cover 15 different time zones. And we deliver digital transformation on a global scale to some of the household names and brands that we are all familiar with. OK. Now, I'm one of those speakers that don't mind you being on your phones, and I actually ask you to be on your phones. So please join me, engage with me. Scan this QR code or go to slido.com and use this number there. I don't know if it's visible for everyone. And tell me, what do you think? How does AI create value? You can choose multiple options here. So you can go to slido.com, and the number is 2370072, or scan the QR code. I see 6 people, 7. OK, that's great. I'm going to ask you a few times during my presentation to do that. OK. So everyone talks about efficiency and automation, analysis, personalization, prediction. OK. Allowing the adoption of other technologies, that's somewhat debatable, but definitely somewhere there. OK. Now, a different question. What are the most common risks related to AI adoption? And this is a word cloud. So any opinion that you want to share, put it out there. It will be visible directly. What are the most common risks? OK, I see hallucination, data security, lazy employees. That's not only for AI. Maybe AI can fix that, actually. No, don't quote me on that. Data leaking, transparency. OK, I think we are on the same page here. And hallucinations seem to be. So I would paraphrase hallucinations as unreliable output. Okay? All right. So putting all this, what we just saw, putting it all together, creates this notion of AI being a black box. We can't predict its outcome very well. It's difficult to control it. It's difficult to see how it creates and comes up to certain decisions, etc. So, but this also is amplified a lot by the hype, and we all are aware of that hype. So how do we ensure that what we ship on the market is responsible and it won't backfire? But what does it mean to backfire? Here's an example. This is a relatively old example at this point, but I still like doing it, or giving it. This is from 2016 when New Zealand introduced a new facial recognition process for the passport application of citizens. I myself used a similar process to get my visa to come here today. So it's everywhere. It's widely adopted. In 2016, however, biases and diverse data sets weren't so popular as they are right now. So as we can, as humans, obviously see that this person's eyes are open, unfortunately, the system gave an error message saying subject's eyes are closed. And the reason for this is because, obviously, the model behind this AI tool was trained on biased data, or at least biased towards certain ethnicity groups. Here's another example. That's relatively more recent, from 2022, when in the Netherlands there was a scandal because it turned out the government has been using, for a few years at this point, an AI model for fraud detection to identify and measure the risk of certain individuals for governmental benefits fraud. More specifically, in this case, it was for child benefits fraud. Until a single mother of twins with Surinamese background decided to sue the government because not only the child benefits were cut, she was asked to return everything for the past years, a few years, which she couldn't do. Again, it turned out that the system is more biased towards certain ethnicity groups, and it wasn't built in the right way. So when I talk about the right way and having these kind of backfires, we can conclude that it's not a matter of if, but rather when. In the past couple of years, with the emergence of a lot of generative AI applications, we've seen more such examples, from severe biases, like what we just saw on the screen, to funny things, where a chatbot can behave in unpredictable ways when put on the public website of a company, or some more serious things, again, where sensitive information has been leaked. And this is exactly the reason why regulation has been making the headlines again, specifically on AI. So when we talk about regulation, it's not just about the current legislation, but what if we put a product on the market right now, and a few years down the line, regulation makes it illegal. A new regulation comes up, or it's updated, and now we have to pull the product from the market and do some more work on it. If it's necessary, we have to do it, of course, but it might pose significant financial and reputation risks. So how do we avoid that? Just a couple of examples very briefly. In 2023, the US introduced the Algorithmic Accountability Act, which forces big companies to have transparent processes and to track the whole process of developing and training models. While last year, in 2024, the EU AI Act was accepted, and it entered into force last August. Right now, all of us have less than 2 years to be fully compliant, because the last deadlines for the EU AI Act are August next year. However, the first deadline already passed on the 2nd of February this year, which was specifically for AI literacy. So all companies that are using, no matter the size of the company, that are using AI tools or putting AI tools on the market need to train their employees. And this is already in force since 2nd of February. So, again, please pick up your phones and tell me, what are the characteristics of responsible AI? What makes an AI system responsible and, okay, accountable, inclusive, transparent, ethical, free of bias? Awesome. I think we are all on the same page here. Ethical grounding, protective. These are great results. And I promise we are not doing a survey right now on what your needs are when it comes to AI. Transparent. Okay, great. Now, here's our definition, and I'm going to expand on that in a second. At MentorMate, we define responsible AI as ethical, safe, secure, and compliant with regulation. But how do you ensure all this? Well, we created our own process and framework for risk assessment. We call it the ESSR, again, Ethics, Safety, Security, and Regulation, Responsible AI Risk Assessment Framework. And I'm going to go into a bit more details about each of the segments here. But basically, we start with the criteria that we just saw that you defined yourself on the screen, right? Accountable and transparent, having the ability to track how, if something goes wrong, why it went wrong, having the ability to enhance privacy, not only comply and protect users' privacy, but also enhance it. Be fair and unbiased towards all user groups, even those that we can't identify right now. Maybe in the future there will be a new user group that starts using our tool. How do we ensure that it's fair towards them? Robust and reliable, so every time we can expect a similar outcome and output from the system. And safe and secure, of course. Once we define these criteria, we can then evaluate them in more details, the risk areas. Now, what are the risk areas? Let's start with domain risks. If we develop a predictive analytics system and use it in the entertainment industry, the level of risks that it might create are much different than a similar predictive analytics model put into a healthcare application, right? Some industries are way more regulated than others, so the domain risks are definitely there. Then there's context risks. If we look back at the healthcare example, are medical professionals going to be using it, or is it patients? What are the different risks that this might cause? Then there's technical risks. What kind of data are we using? What kind of algorithms are we running through this data? Can we potentially create new risks if we choose the wrong algorithms on the wrong data? Then process risks. Are there any biases that we might be introducing throughout the process? And not only the development process, even the way that users are using this. And last but definitely not least, design risks. Can we identify any problems with how the application or tool that we are developing can create once it's shipped on the market? Once we evaluate the risk areas, we can measure the more specific risks. So, is there any potential for perpetuating existing biases? Because sometimes AI systems, as we've seen recently in the past couple of years, can even amplify the existing biases. What about the inconsistent results that we were talking about? or potential privacy breaches or vulnerability manipulations? And is it clear if something goes wrong, why it went wrong, and who is to blame? And when we are done with measuring the specific risks, then we can prioritize risk mitigation controls. What this means is, from the get-go, from the start of the project's lifecycle, we can identify a list of requirements that we constantly reevaluate against the knowledge that we have about the application, which also updates over time, and make sure that our system complies with all of this. So do we have the process of enough testing in place or rigorous testing? Is it tested well enough with different data, with different user groups? Do we have the right privacy and privacy rules and controls? Or is it possible to track the decision-making process? If we design the system as transparent from the beginning, we can do that, most of the time, at least. So putting it back all together, we have this iterative process that goes from defining the criteria that we want our system to comply to, evaluating the risk areas, measuring the more specific risks here, and then prioritizing the risk controls. And then reevaluating. As I said, this is an iterative process. But when do you do it exactly? Well, here's another framework that we created. This is our project management framework specifically for AI projects that we use in all of our such projects, internally and for our clients. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details here, but the important thing is that we have a few phases. We start with planning and design, which consists of enterprise design thinking most of the time. Then we have preparation and setup, working on the data, working on some proof of concepts, on the different models that we can train with the data that we have access to. Then fully training the model or models. And finally, a whole separate test just for validation and verification before integrating it into a wider project application. Now, I want to draw your attention to the few different ESSR assessment points. Because as we saw, this is a process that heavily depends on the knowledge and understanding that we have of the product that we are developing, which updates over time, over the life cycle. So even at the beginning, when we started with enterprise design thinking, we can already understand what are the domain risks, the context risks, what data risks might potentially be present. Then once we start working with a few proof of concepts to benchmark their performance, we can do another assessment. Is the data biased? Can we identify potential problems with the algorithms that we have selected? And once we are, again, ready with the whole model training or integration, we again do an ESSR assessment. And this continues even after deployment to production. On a regular basis, this has to be reevaluated because there's, of course, the risks of more technical risks like model drift, for example. Okay. Now, I'm going to put on the screen a couple of example cases, and I'm going to ask you again to pick up your phones to see, just to give you an example of why this is important. So this is the first case. I'm going to read it now, just to ensure that everyone is aware. A large technology company is expanding its AI team to improve its facial recognition software. Even though the team acknowledges that improving the system's accuracy for all users is a priority, due to time constraints, they decide to focus their immediate efforts on enhancing the system's performance for lighter-skinned individuals, given that most of their customer base comes from regions where the demographic is more prevalent. Okay, now, what bias is present in the facial recognition system's performance that I just described? You should be able to see the case again on your phone. There are 3 correct options among these 5. And I think they should be fairly obvious. Regional biases, gender, cognitive biases, algorithmic, and racial biases. What do you think? $13 people. Great. Okay. So it's very easy to identify racial biases. And I completely agree. That's something that has been in discussions a lot in media. Regional, algorithmic biases. But then maybe we also have gender and cognitive biases, which are actually not present in this case in particular. My point here is, even when something is very obvious there, for us as humans, we might struggle identifying it, especially imagine in a very stressful environment where this might not be so obvious in a paragraph. This might be somewhere in thousands of data entries. Like how do we identify this in our data, and how do we avoid that the AI model won't pick up these issues? Okay. Another question. Again, the same scenario. Nothing's changed. What ethical issues is raised by the team's decision to prioritize improvements for certain users? Select all the correct options. And again, you can scan the QR code if you lost the connection. So here we have equity, the decision to focus on lighter-skinned users, fairness, accountability, inclusivity, and ethical AI design. Eight people. Okay. Let's move on. Okay, this was a trick question because all of it was true. All of the options were correct.
It only lets you select two, so you can't answer.
Does it?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, even when we talk about responsible applications, sometimes we face technical issues. Anyway, my point here again is, just in the when we're pressured by time, or when we have to prioritize, sometimes we don't even realize. Again, this is a very obvious example, but sometimes we don't realize what biases or what issues we might be creating when developing such systems. Okay, another case now. It's a continuation of the previous one. To get more people working on this, the company uses a hiring algorithm. It analyzes past applicants' resumes and consistently selects candidates from top-tier universities. The hiring manager notices that most of the selected applicants are male, with a higher percentage coming from affluent areas. Despite having more female applicants, the algorithm appears to favor male candidates for technical roles. Now, what bias can you identify in the hiring process? Now we have three correct options. Gender, socioeconomic bias, age, educational, confirmation bias, or cultural bias. Nine, 10 people, 11, okay, great. Okay. So, again, even in such an obvious example, it's not easy for everyone to be on the same opinion, and we see things a bit differently, and which is perfectly normal. We come from different places with different backgrounds, we have different roles, etc. And if I go back at our framework, yeah, here. One question that I get asked every time I show this is, who is doing this assessment? And there's no one role, no one person that should be doing this. It should be a consortium of people, not only engineers and data scientists, but also domain experts or compliance officers. Even HR can be involved in this. So what we do in our internal processes, especially when we work with clients, we try to involve a group of people that's dedicated to this assessment, and the group can even change at the different stages of the assessment. But the point is to gather as much as possible different opinions and make sure that we have the right mitigation controls, because this is the whole point. We identify the risks, we analyze them, we come up with the mitigation controls, and then we repeat. And this, by the way, is based on some of the most popular guidances on the market, like HITRUST, NIST, OWASP, etc. And the goal here when we were designing this was to have something that would survive any new regulation as well. Now, this doesn't mean that you'll be fully compliant just by following this, but it will definitely help. And as a final note, again, we are working towards putting this as open source on the market so everyone can use it. We have a couple of minutes left, so if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer. Otherwise, afterwards, I'm available.
Thank you. This was a great presentation. So I saw the ESSR network has 4 frameworks in it, but I'd like to understand is there a role within an organization? We're talking about how the organization protects itself from external factors as well. We mostly focus on that in AI, but is there a role within the organization of an auditor to make sure that all these decision makers, or possibly the shareholders or on the board, don't have any internal motive to, earlier, and I'm just saying, I'm just playing devil's advocate, earlier there could be 1 or 2 people who work very closely with them who could skew things. Now they have the entire machinery skewed for their benefit. So who plays the role to call them out?
It's definitely possible to include an auditor in the consortium of people, and depending on the use case, depending on the company and the industry especially, this might even be mandatory, yeah.
Does that exist right now?
It's possible, yeah. So we don't always have it, but it's definitely possible. And when we work on client projects, we also involve the client, obviously, in this, and because they are the experts of their business, of their domain. Yeah. There's a question here.
Oh, well,
yeah.
That mic. So when you think about solving problems for society, right, you often look at the impacted populations, and the rule of thumb goes, not that it always happens, if you solve the problem for the most marginalized groups, it of course will then work for the majority population. Do you feel like that approach could work in this space, or just because of the way you need data in order to train these models, you must sort of always kind of start with the majority and then work your way into the smaller groups? Just wanted to get your thought there, also understanding its impact on society. It's a kind of give and take there.
So this is about raising the awareness and understanding the risks, right? What the goal of the application is. It could be anything. We just need to be able to make informed decisions from the start till the end of the project's life cycle. So again, to answer your question, sometimes data is not available from the get-go, and it's very biased. That's one of the biggest issues, by the way. And if you ask me what the biggest challenge in AI will be in the next 1 year, let's say, it will be the availability of data. But then there are ways to go around this. There are synthetic data as well that we can, or we can augment our existing data sets with synthetic data. So it is possible to fix it, as long as we are aware. Yeah.
I love the framework and the guidance. I think working from data first is always a great solution. When you're trying to verify the results you're getting, especially with LLMs, right? Like where you're talking about potentially billions of data points, and so moving between them, you've now got trillions of interconnections. What is a strategy by which you can really verify what went into making a decision in a way that you can reliably report on? Like, okay, for this particular decision, I can go in and I can maybe get a list of everything that went into it. But how do you as a mass approach manage to say across all of our decisions, these are the things that how do you do that?
We can ground the model, and we can design the model or the application from the beginning again to work in a specific manner or with towards a specific output, let's say, or avoid a list of potential risky outputs that we have identified. This is the whole point of this. By grounding it, so using an LLM or a foundational model that's been trained on all the data on Wikipedia or on the internet might not be the smartest thing to do if we want something more niche. We can still use it, but then we have to make sure it's grounded. So there are other approaches. Someone mentioned RAG earlier today. There are ways to fine-tune the model. And yeah.
I mean, I like the approach. I'm worried about data substitutes, right? Like, so redlining is a great data substitute for, like ethnicity or something like that, right? Like, so it just seems super hard without an AI truly understanding context, right? Like, you can give it context, but it doesn't understand, it doesn't have that human experience to be able to ground this context is the same as that. Okay, anyway, thank you.
We can continue the conversation after this, but for the rest, very, very briefly, the human is always important to be in the loop, always. We are not trying to remove anyone or automate it. Actually, we're doing the opposite with all this. We are ensuring that the right people are present at key points as gate phases, even, phase gates, even during the process. Yeah.
Bobby, great presentation. I have a very fundamental question, and everybody in the room can probably laugh about it. But so we have access to very sensitive data, which is actually you all's data. So I work in a law firm. So I have a situation where other than contractual obligations, so here's my question. Other than contractual obligations, what other tools you would recommend or suggest companies might use with their vendors who are actually leveraging the fundamental LLMs to use to provide their service? The issue is we don't want to put our clients' data into these platforms until we are sure that they are not training off of our data. They will say till the cows come home that they are not training off of our data, but how do I, someone who's in the middle, confirm other than contractual obligations? Thank you.
I think I'm allowed to say that. We are using an internal tool, an internally hosted LLM for our employees. That's one way to go about it. Even if you have an enterprise agreement with OpenAI and your employees are using ChatGPT, there's no guarantee. So just do it yourself, and it's not that difficult. Probably it will be cheaper actually to run it yourself.
There
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm way above the time limit, so I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards.
Thanks, Bobby.